coming back to U of L in the spring to teach advanced issues in criminal law, sex offenses, which is just the law school version of the sex offender class. So it's kind of, it's not anything that I had on my bingo card several years ago of, hey, will you write a textbook for a class? But once again, here we are. So some of the things that are in the book, some of the chapters and the things that the book covers, I think there's 11 chapters in all in the book. The crown jewel story of this book is called The Monster at My Law School. About 2 years before me, there was a student, he was a 3L, I was a 1L. This guy was on the path to really doing some really good stuff. He was a commercial pilot. He was on his way to practice corporate law, had a really good setup. Probably about 6 months after he graduates, all of our phones start lighting up because this guy had been arrested. We're like, what did he get arrested for? And turns out, and this is a quote from the FBI agent that was investigating him, one of the top 3 cases of child pornography that this officer had ever seen in his entire career. And it was just crazy to me because, like, this is a guy that we know. Like, I've been in class with you. I've sat in your car before. You're from New Albany. I'm from New Albany. We had some of the same teachers in school. You're listening to some of the facts of his case, and it's like, oh, you were taking pictures of little kids at Community Park. I take my kid to Community Park. You're taking pictures of kids playing at the Chick-fil-A play place on State Street. I go to that Chick-fil-A. Like, it was very, very surreal. And it got me thinking, you know, I think there's an article here for parents to really understand what child pornography is, to understand how it's being produced, and to understand where it is in 2023. You know, I'm the father of a 9-year-old daughter, of a 3-month-old son, so obviously I'm terrified of the internet. But my daughter, she plays Minecraft. Now back in my day, video games were a lot more simple, but now everything's online. You got these chat functions, and that's where people like this guy that we graduated with, that's, you know, one of the areas that he was going to. So like, hey, we can write this story to give parents, you know, an inside look at some of the stuff that's going on. But we can also write it in a way with a little bit, where it can be a little bit gripping as well. Because when I found out about this case, we were kind of edging up to the sentencing part of things. And I'm sitting at home and I'm like, hey, I could just go to his sentencing and write about this stuff in real time. Once again, I don't have to be at work, so let's just do that. So we go down to the sentencing, and you know, about a 2.5-hour process, and it was really interesting to kind of hear some of the stuff that was going on there. You know, I know that we always cheer when people like this get, you know, arrested, and we want to celebrate and things like that. But it was very interesting to see the other side of it. His family that was there. He had one aunt that flew in from Florida, who was ruined because she co-signed on his law school loan, with the idea that either A, you're going to pay this loan back through practice, or B, you're going to pay it back through your job as a commercial pilot. Can't practice law or fly planes if you're in prison. So now she's on the hook for all this, and these are not wealthy people. These are kind of poor people, if we're being honest with you. So now you're on the hook for all of that, and it was something that wasn't even your fault. So it was interesting to see kind of how the family reacted. One of the stories that I like to tell from going to that hearing, I don't think that there is ever a time where you can be prepared to see child pornography. But you definitely don't want it sprung on you. You definitely don't want to be surprised with it. And at one point, we're sitting in the hearing, and I look over and I notice that the deputies are starting to draw the shades a little bit, and I see the TV light up, and you know, the prosecutor's like, we have gone through his entire collection, a collection that has been built for 3 decades, and we have picked out the 25 worst pieces in this collection just to show you what this guy was up to. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, well, they about to show this now? Like,
right.
They're gonna put that up there? And I'm like, should I leave? Like, do I need to see this? But then I'm like, well, no, this is the work that you've decided to go into, so sit down and watch it. You can't, talk about this at the law library lunch series if you got up and walked out of the room. So that was an interesting thing, but that's kind of the anchor story in the book. And like I said, it's something that's with parents in mind of like, hey, here's a way that you can protect your children. There's another essay in here about revenge porn and the lack of revenge porn laws. This is something that I love to tell my students about at U of L and IUS, and even some of the high school students that I meet as well. We're knee deep into this digital world, right? We got we have these little wonderful media studios in our pockets now that can do a lot more than my little Nokia could do. I could play Snake on it, but that was about it. But now we can shoot full movies on these things, and you have so many, these high school students that are sending pictures back and forth, and like as a parent, you're like, don't do that, because you never know what's going to happen once that picture has gotten to its recipient. Things are great now. Things are rosy between the two of you now, but what happens a month later whenever you break up with that person and now it's time for revenge? And really going in and looking at some of the more extreme stories. People who have lost their jobs because pictures have been brought to their boss. People who have committed suicide because of the heaviness that comes with having your personal images shared with the world, and really some of the lack of laws that there are against some of that stuff. There's definitely an argument to make that this is an area where we could possibly tighten things up. We have an essay in here called "Why Didn't She Just Say No?" This is something investigating sexual misconduct issues on a college campus that I've heard several times. Like, well, yeah, so something happened, and you're telling us that you didn't want it to happen. Why didn't you just tell the guy no? Why didn't you just say no? But when we kind of look at the way that people have historically handled rejection, the audacity to say no has led to assault. It has led to people being seriously hurt. It has led to women being killed. So sometimes it's not just as easy as just say no, because you don't quite know what the reaction on the other side of it's going to be. Now, how do we get there? How do we get to a place where no leads to violence? If you kind of look at some of the media that's out there and some of the things that young boys are taught through media, you kind of see that. I am a huge fan of the Rocky series, and by default, the Creed series as well. I've seen those movies a million times. I might go home and watch Rocky 4 when I get home today, because go America. But in the very first Rocky movie in the 70s, one of the themes through that movie is that the love story between Rocky and Adrian is just this burning, passionate love story that transcends everything. It exists when Rocky is rich. It's still there whenever he loses all of his money and he's poor again. But like, if we look at how that whole thing got started, Adrian didn't want to go on the date with him in the first place. She was nudged into it. And then she goes on the date with this guy and winds up at his apartment. And the scene where they had their first kiss, before that kiss, she says 7 times, so I counted, I don't think I should be here. I don't think I should be in a man's apartment. I need to leave. I need to go home. And Rocky just keeps on pushing and pushing and pushing. And that first kiss happens, but if you pause the frame and you look at how everything's set up, here is this big, bulky dude who, before he was a boxer, he worked for the mafia, breaking people's legs who didn't pay their money, positioned in front of the door with his hand up to where Adrian could not get around this guy. So it's kind of like, all right, I guess I got to kiss the greasy mob guy or else. And she kisses it, and the first kiss is really just kind of hesitant, but that second kiss is when she falls into it. And I'm sitting there watching it now with 2023 post-Me Too glasses thinking like, so the message here is if a girl says no about 7 or 8 times, just ask her that 9th time. But make sure that you're positioned to where she can't get away from you. And then she'll fall in love with you forever. And it's like, what are we doing, right? Growing up in the 90s, I was a big hip hop fan in the 90s. Not that much these days, but back then, me and my Walkman, we didn't go too far away from each other. And one video that I remember to a T, I remember the Nothing But a G Thing video with Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. And I remember a scene at the end of that video where this woman comes into a house party that they're having, and these guys are looking at her and trying to come up to her, and she's just like, no, I'm good. Within 20 seconds later, it results in them taking 40 ounces of malt liquor, shaking it up, and dousing this woman, really driving home the point that, hey, she's the bad guy here. She's the villain for not succumbing to their attention. And I'm looking at this once again in 2023 in my post-Me Too glasses and thinking like, but all she said was no. Like, why is she the bad guy for? Like, are we not allowed to say no? So when you grow up and you consume that media, sometimes it is hard to hear the word no, because a lot of times we get taught that, men are supposed to be all about the conquest. Well, when the conquest fails, what does that say about your manhood? So we take a look at that. There's an article about R. Kelly and Bill Cosby. I'm sorry. and what happens when our heroes are proven to do some really horrible things? This article got started like a lot of things in my life get started arguing on Facebook. Arguing on Facebook with family members who, despite R. Kelly and Bill Cosby being convicted of their crimes, being like, well, whatever, we're still not going to give them up, because the Cosby Show was such an influential part of my life 30 years ago. Or I'm not going to give R. Kelly up because daggone it, Ignition was a good song. And I'm like, so like none of this sexual assault stuff matters to you. Like, none of that's not a deal breaker for you. The fact that you found pleasure in their art weighs more? Is that what we're saying? The other argument is like, well, it's an attack on black men. You taking Bill Cosby and R. Kelly down, it's just an attack on black men. It's an attack on our pillars. What about Bill O'Reilly? What about Donald Trump? What about cue all these other white men that have done things that have gotten what about Harvey Weinstein? And this was at a time before Harvey Weinstein had gone through the legal process. And it's like, hey, I get it. I totally understand what you're saying. Historically, black men have gotten a pretty bad time in court. Totally get that. And if you want to make the argument, if you want to sit here and make the argument that we're looking at this in the wrong way and this is somehow racism, there's other examples that we can use. Central Park 5. This was right around the time that documentary came out. There are 5 young men who had their lives stolen from them due to a false accusation. Who the president, before he was president, took out ads in several newspapers in New York calling for the death penalty to come back for these 5 guys. Hey, let's talk about them. There's other stories that you guys can talk about too. So I think we can make that argument that like, hey, yeah, there are some situations that are messed up, but like the key is that you got to be innocent. And that has to be the first thing. If you want to make that, if you want to use that as the example, you got to be innocent. These two are not. The story that you brought up, attorneys say the darndest things. So kind of going through, we needed something a little lighthearted. We needed something a little short that we could put in there. And so I got thinking, I'm like, you know what? There are a lot of mistruths that have been spoken about sexual misconduct. And just like you said, the bad thing about doing it in court is there's a record. So it doesn't take too long for some smart aleck like me to look it up and make fun of you about it. So we went through and we looked at three little stories of attorneys saying things that just were not correct at all about sexual misconduct, which blew my mind because it wasn't that long ago at that time that I was a law clerk. So it's like, hey, attorneys, I know how this is. You're not doing the research. You got other law clerks to do it for you. So literally just have them do the research, and then you could like not say something stupid in open court and wind up in this book. But judicial stupidity, I'd be out of a job if that wasn't a thing. So lawyers say the darndest things, and if we're going to talk about dumb things that lawyers say, well, we got to talk about stupid things politicians say as well. So we can, Matt Bevin, let's talk about it. Let's go. And so I had some fun writing those articles because that was something where I could, use my voice a little bit. For those of you who are here that actually know me, you know I'm a smart ass. So this was an opportunity that I could kind of let a little bit of my personality shine through on some of these stories. We got celebrities say the darndest things. Judges say the darndest things. CEOs say the darndest things. I got a whole series of these. Just got to figure out when to put them out. But yeah, it's really just taking a look and doing your research in the way that you're supposed to do it. The fruit of the poisonous tree. That was an article and an essay that actually got me my first TED Talk. So I remembered the fruit of the poisonous tree theory from criminal procedure. And I remember it exactly, okay, here's how it's used, here's what we do to get evidence thrown out that, was ill-gotten. But like this is also like a great metaphor for masculinity as well. This is a great metaphor for the system that creates toxic masculinity. So like let me use this as the metaphor. You have this tree that grows at the top of the hill, and a friend of mine on social media said, hey, you know what? You ought to call it the toxic masculina tree. I'm like, ooh, that's good. I'm going to copyright that real quick. So you have the toxic masculina tree that grows at the top of the hill, and then hanging off the tree are different pieces of fruit. And the fruit represents, the product of toxic masculinity. The fruit, there's a piece of fruit for domestic violence. There's a piece of fruit for dating violence. There's a piece of fruit for sexual assault, stalking, racism, homophobia and transphobia, misogyny. And then you have all of these young boys around the tree eating the fruit. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, so if that's our metaphor, how exactly does this tree go about growing? What are the elements that makes a toxic masculinity tree sprout up, in the first place? It's, the desire for control, and it's entitlement. And when those two things get together, you have a toxic situation on your hands. And just like a normal tree or a normal plant, you have to have someone that helps it grow. So who's helping it grow? Well, a lot of these behaviors are generational. All behaviors learn. We learn behavior from our parents. So if our parents are giving us a lesson that's not right, then that's what we're going to take as truth because we're kids and we trust our parents, right? Yeah. So a lot of times this stuff is coming down from generation to generation to generation. Outside of the family organization, look at other examples. I use the University of Louisville's men's basketball team as a great example. U of L has the distinction of being the only university to ever have a national championship taken away, because they decided to buy hookers to get people to come to their school. Whose ideal was that? Well, the ideal belongs to the administration. I mean, it was a senior coach who was funding that, who was organizing that, and who was putting it together. So I almost don't even blame the actual students for participating in this, because this is an environment that was set by Andre McGee, and who knows who else had a hand in it. So if I'm a freshman coming around, like, hey, I'm trying to determine what school to go to. Hey man, we're having a party over in the basketball dorm. Here's what we have going on. Is that okay? Can I partake in that? Sure, absolutely. Well, everyone else is partaking in it. I'm a 17 or an 18-year-old. Here I am, getting involved in it as well. But it goes all the way up to senior leadership, people who should know better. And then we kind of we ended on a happy note. It's like, hey, what can we do though? What can we do to kind of knock these toxic masculinitys down? How can we cut it down? I always tell this story. We have this tree in my yard, and this tree is always dropping these big branches all the time. And one day I'm sitting here, I see this big branch sitting in my yard, and I'm like, man, that branch would make some good firewood. I've got to chop it up. Now, I've never chopped wood before. I didn't know the mechanics that went with chopping wood. I go to Lowe's and I get a hatchet, not an axe, a little hatchet about that big. And in my mind, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go out there, I'm gonna take this hatchet, and in one swipe, I'm gonna break that wood up like Thor swinging the hammer. And once again, my friends here, they'll tell you that, I like to put on a show. I dragged this branch in the middle of my yard because I want all my neighbors to see what is about to happen. I got a tank top on. I want everyone to know, like, hey, don't mess with that guy right there. He's a wood chopping man. So I'm over here trying to chop this wood, and I got tired after the first 3 minutes, and it was like that much that hatchet was doing. My daughter, she's sitting there watching me just like, this is my dad. And finally, I was putting on a show, all right. People were watching. Finally, one of my neighbors, he comes over with an axe. He's like, dude, it's getting kind of sad. Let me help you out here. And I'm like, oh, thank you, dude. Thank you. I appreciate you. But, all that to say, if we're going to chop down the toxic masculinitys and we're going to try to remove toxic behaviors from whatever area where you're in, it's a team sport. It is a team lift, as they say over at Target. It takes more than just one person. One person can try it, but just like me trying to chop that branch up, you're gonna get tired, you're gonna get sweaty, you're gonna get nasty, you're probably gonna give up. But if you have the rest of your fraternity brothers or your teammates or your co-workers or your actual real brothers working together, that's really how you make inroads into doing something that's gonna be a little bit healthier. And there's examples out there of organizations that are doing just that. The last one I'll talk about, then I'll answer any questions that you guys may have. So kind of going a little bit off of the masculinity, but still keeping it with men and men's health. I was at PRP. Yeah, I was at PRP about 2 years ago, doing a session with their freshmen on bystander intervention. Kind of tell them like, hey, if you see something, say something. Here's how we can get involved. Here's how we can work to make PRP a better place. And there was this one kid sitting in the front row. You could tell he was the class joker, class clown. He's cutting up. And he puts his hand up and he's like, well, I mean, I guess this is all good for the girls. I'm like, nah, dude, it's good for you too. He's like, what I need this for? Like, I'm a guy. I'm not gonna get sexually assaulted. I'm like, nah, dude, it happens to guys too. And then he says, well, whatever. It would take a really big girl to sexually assault me. And I'm looking at him and I'm like,
not necessarily.
okay. Several things. Number one, you are not that big. So, it ain't gonna take a big girl. You get a girl 125 pounds in here and it's over for you, little man. But also, it's like, oh, I get it. You think that for a man to be sexually assaulted, it has to be by a female. No. Let me tell you what's going on in your football locker room right now. His eyes get all big. And I'm like, there's one thing I'm good at, is scaring the hell out of high school kids. I can do that with the best of them. But it got me thinking, it's like, man, he's probably not the only guy that thinks this. Sexual assault, it happens to men as well. But see, we have that little cute masculinity wall that we have to climb over sometimes. So instead of calling it sexual assault, we call it other things. We call it we call it hazing, right? Yeah, man, it's just a little bit of hazing. We're gonna break the new guys in and everything. I'm like, nope, everything you just did was sexual assault. As a matter of fact, while I was at PRP that day, I'm there for the entire day. In the afternoon, I'm doing the session, and I noticed that all of the kids are pulling their phones out, like around the same time, and looking at something, to the point where I had to stop. I was like, what's going on? Like, because like literally all of you are looking at your phone right now. And there was a situation at St. X High School where a young man was sodomized with the end of a lacrosse stick, I believe. Well, of course, we're in this digital generation where everything is recorded and shared. So that's what those kids were watching. They had gotten the video sent to them of that sexual assault, and they're all kind of watching it. And once again, it's not portrayed as sexual assault, not portrayed as sodomy, what the KRS would say. It's just hazing. It's just horsing around. It's just a little bit of fun. So in this article, we look at the hazing that happens in athletic teams. We look at the hazing that happens in fraternities. I always ask people, I'm like, hey, what organization? I'll ask you guys to see if you guys know the answer to it. What organization has the most reports and is the worst for sexual assault through hazing? Anyone want to take a guess?
Military.
United States military. Absolutely. The United States military reports more sexual misconduct through hazing than any sports team, than any fraternity that you can think of. And so we get down to the nitty gritty. We tell those stories. And I love going out, and I love actually telling them to high school or to college students face to face, because the look on their face, they cross their legs all up, they look visibly uncomfortable. And it's like, good, I am glad that you're uncomfortable. That was the point of all of this. Yeah, it happens to us guys too. So like, now that you know that it happens to guys too, do you care about it now? Do you care about it now that you know it could happen to you? Because like, hey, that's great. If you care about it because of yourself, that's great. Now you can also care about it for our women out there as well. Because this isn't a men's problem or a women's problem. It's a community problem. So we got to attack it like a community. So those are some of the stories that are in there. Like I said, they're all little short essays. They're very digestible, very easy to to read and everything. And they're all just written in that in the voice, to where if you do have a legal background, you'll appreciate the research. If you don't have a legal background, you'll appreciate the tone. So, what questions? Anyone have any questions? Natalie, if no one else asks a question, you got to have one. Yes.
Not really a question, but I have noticed, as far as masculinity, mental health is a big thing with men, or lack thereof, as far as getting help. And well, I'm a guy. I don't cry. I don't get sad. Things like that. So I'll get angry before I get sad. And a lot of times when you're angry, you're actually really sad.
Yeah.
So I think that too would be something great to touch on, because it's, a lot in the Black community too, not trying to be all Black people, whatever, but it is what it is.
Yep.
As far as just men, no matter what color, men in general, have a lot more of a difficult time that I've seen with, hey, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
Hey, could you help me with this? I would love to, be an advocate, even though I'm a woman, for men's mental health.
Back in March, I went to Michigan to do my third, my latest, maybe my last TED Talk. And my wife, our child was supposed to be born in April, but he decided he's just going to come like a whole month early. So it's like, hey, so are you going to cancel your TED Talk? I'm like, no. I'm like, but I promise you, the moment I get off this plane, I'm going directly to the hospital. So I got in big trouble with the wife for still going up to Michigan to do this. I went up to Lake Superior State University and did a TED Talk on this very topic. We kind of looked at the way that some young boys are raised, and when we're raised, we're given, what I like to call our man box, and when you open it up, there's all of the emotions that are okay for men to feel. We're allowed to be angry, we're allowed to be excited, we're allowed to be happy, but we're not allowed to be sad. We're not allowed to be vulnerable, and we're not allowed to do anything that would show weakness, because gender roles say that we are the protectors, we are the breadwinners, we're the ones that are going out on the hunt and bringing that line back. And as such, you can't be weak if you're going to do all that stuff. And to drive that point home, we use little terms like, hey, man up, or real men don't cry. My mother's favorite thing to tell me, she even tells me this today, get your priorities straight. I'm like, my priority is just being upset right now.
Right.
And because of that, then we are unable to miss out, or we're unable to fully gain all the benefits of a tool like therapy. We don't go to therapy because, once again, it's weak. Now, we will go to a doctor if we break our leg. If we have a back spasm on the football field, we're gonna be in that trainer's office getting that liquid heat. But for whatever reason, therapy, is off the table. To kind of go to what you're saying, if we want to go on a derivative in the Black community, therapy is a no-no because we have the Black church. So you don't have to go to therapy; just pray, and that'll take care of it all, right?
I wish it would.
That'll take care of it all. Like, you don't need nothing else. So that's something that we got to deal with. And then what happens is that all of that trauma starts building up and building up and building up. And we think we're pushing it down, but it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And then the next thing you know, you're running up on stage at the Oscars and slapping Chris Rock in the face after he makes a joke about your wife. So like, yeah, like let's kind of go back and take a look at that man box and see if we can update it. And let's also just take care of each other. I know my friends probably think I'm crazy because I'll send them a text. Hey, you okay today?
Yep.
Yeah, wow, what's up? I didn't put anything on social media. Just checking in. Just want to let you know I love you. If you need anything, holler at me.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. I'm like, hey, but that's what I'm going to do,
Yeah.
just to let you know, because I wish somebody had done that for me whenever I was going through some of the rough parts of my
Normalize
life.
it.
So, yeah, let's just think of normal,
And
right?
that could also really stop a lot of the generational stuff.
Yeah.
If a father who is, willing to go get mental health treatment, things like that, he'd be a lot more apt to, okay, son, daughter, your dad goes through this, and I'm just fine. You know what I mean? It's not. I'm still big bad dad.
Yeah.
But big bad dad gets sad, so
Right.
I need to talk to somebody. And it's okay.
We were in the whole family, we were in a pretty bad car accident last Thursday.
Really?
On the Watterson. Someone was texting, they hit the car in front of them, which swerved into our lane and hit us and pushed us all the way over on the side. And I tell you what, I had no problem at all telling my daughter, I'm like, hey, your daddy was scared.
Yeah.
I was scared to death. I didn't she's like, what? It's like, how, tell me, what did you feel? I'm like, there was a moment, there was maybe a split second that I thought that we were dead.
Yeah.
And the only thing that snapped me back into it was when I heard you screaming, and I heard your brother screaming, and I can hear myself screaming, I'm like, good,
Right.
everybody's alive.
Right.
That's the best sound in my entire, hearing my family scream at the top of their lungs, best sound I ever heard in my entire life. But no, your dad was terrified. Your dad is still scared. Your dad don't want to get on the Wilkerson right now. Don't want to go on any highway.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and see what they got set up over here at IUS so I can talk to somebody, because I know I'm gonna have to drive at some point.
Yeah.
So let me get where I need to be at.
Right.
So,
You don't want to get stuck.
but yeah, just tell them it's because it's okay. It's okay to be
Normalize those
scared.
other feelings besides angry and things like that, and that could definitely, help with the younger generations and have more of a sound mind, I guess, because not a lot of people are very sound right now.
100%. Yes, sir.
Do you see some generational shifts in some of this mindset and some of this thinking as opposed to that of our parents or our grandparents?
So I love telling my students, I'm like, hey, look, you Gen Z kids, y'all get a bad rap. Every bad thing in the world is blamed on Gen Z. Now, you guys did ruin hip hop. You ruined it. But there's some places where you guys are doing pretty good. And I think this generation now is more accepting of mental health issues. They understand it more, and it's less of a problem for them than, say, for us millennials. We were kind of getting there, but the further you go back, my mom, there's no point in even asking her to go to some sort of counseling or therapy or anything like that. She just ain't going, because that's not what we did back in the day. That's not what we're going to do now. But these Gen Zs, these younger kids, they're starting to really accept it. And I hear them talking. I work with our fraternities and sororities on my campus, and I hear some of the kids talking like, yeah, so I was talking to my therapist about this yesterday. My therapist said, and I'm like,
Good.
okay, and it's just so casual. Like, they kind of look at you like, you don't have a therapist.
Right, yeah.
What's wrong with you?
Who are
Like,
you talking to then?
so I'm like, yes, I love it. So I do think I do think slowly but surely, it's getting a little bit better. Yes, ma'am.
So have you done a deep dive into the trauma of specifically women or victims of sexual assault, and sort of examined long-term issues and that sort of thing? Is that part of what you present to young men?
That's what I'll present to anyone. Next week, actually, I'm heading over to U of L. There is a group at U of L called Ignite the Ville, which is a Christian-based group. And I'm going over there to talk about sexual misconduct, but they asked me something specific. They're like, can you talk about discipleship and how we can really help from our position, help our students that have been victims, and then also, kind of help our students that have been the perpetrators as well. And for me, on the victim side of things, it's understanding what the victim of a sexual misconduct is going through. Understanding that we still, even though things are getting better, we still have a society where there is a stigma attached to sexual misconduct. And that stigma can be even greater depending on how you were raised. If you were raised in a house that was very strict on sex, and sex is not supposed to happen at all for any reason unless you are in a marriage. Sexual misconduct, the crime of rape, that sets off guilt. That sets off embarrassment. That sets off a part of your brain that even though this wasn't on you, even though you were attacked, still kind of going in that brain, it's like, I have let down the way that I've been taught. And this embarrassment. And that's part of the reason why a lot of these crimes and these incidents don't get reported. They don't get reported to me. They don't get reported to the police. So there's the embarrassment, there's the shame, there's the PTSD that can come along with it as well. And what I try to get across, especially to this group that I'm talking to, is like, once again, there is power in prayer. I believe that. But let's not be stupid, because at the end of the day, God has given us these other little pieces on the board down here that can do the work on the ground.
Yeah.
They've given us counseling. They've given us therapy. At U of L, they've given us places like the Peace Center. And these are professionals that are trained to help with that trauma. You might intend well, you might, have a good heart, but I need you to take that person to the professional. Natalie might have a good heart, but Natalie don't know how to fix a broke leg. So Natalie, I'm not going to come to you with a broke leg. Now you can drive me to the hospital if you
Right.
want, but I need you redirecting these students to the professionals, because there is trauma that comes along with it, and it's not always trauma that you can see with the naked eye.
Right.
Sometimes it's trauma that's deep down in here that takes a little bit of time to kind of come up to the surface, and even when it does come out, you still might not be able to see it. So.
Well, and that's particularly relevant with religious groups, as there have been many reports of sexual assault, and sort of the official cover-up of it, not just the Catholic Church, but many other churches throughout the nation, where that's the knee-jerk reaction. Cover it up,
Yep.
never happened, and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
To the victim, you're gonna be okay. So that's a particularly important thing to talk to them about. I'm glad you're doing that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's like an onion. There's layers to this. Some of the layers you might be able to handle, but if you can't handle it, guess what? There's someone right around the corner that can. So we need to work as like I said, community problem, right? Not just one person, not just men's or women's. This is a community thing. So who in our community is suited to handle this particular part of the problem? You guys ask way better questions than my students do. They just look at me like I'm crazy out there. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns?
Well, thank you. I think we'll close there.
All right.
Thank you for your answers. I wish you the best of luck. If anybody wants to buy any books, you can see he's got some books for sale and signing there with him. I wish you the best. I hope you become a dean one day.
Hey, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there.
So,
Well,
thank
on
you,
your
and I
way.
hope to see everybody here in July.
Thank you.